Hi everyone, this is Elizabeth Dern. I will be reciting Shakespeare Sonnet number 146, giving a brief analysis and then reciting it again so that you can have a deeper understanding. Poor soul, the center of my sinful earth, feeding these rebel powers that thee array, why dost thou pine within and suffer dearth, painting thy outward walls so costly gay? Why so large cost, having so short a lease, dost thou upon thy fading mansion spend? Shall worms, inheritors of this excess, eat up thy charge? Is this thy body's end? Then, soul, live thou upon thy servant's loss, and let that pine to aggravate thy store. Buy terms divine in selling hours of dross, within be fed, without be rich no more. So shalt thou feed on death that feeds on men, and death, once dead, there's no more dying then. This poem centers around the soul. The speaker sees the soul to be the part of the being that lives on after death. It is seen as Shakespeare's only explicitly religious poem. Written in the late 1590s, the poem would have been written under the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, who was a Protestant. She had outlawed Catholicism, therefore Shakespeare's public religion would have been Protestant. What he practiced privately was unknown, but it wouldn't have mattered because both Protestants and Catholics believe in the idea that the soul lives on after the body dies. In the first quatrain, the speaker begins by addressing his inner soul in an inner monologue. He says, "Poor soul, the center of my sinful earth." Here, earth means body, which means he's addressing the soul as the core of his being. He goes on to say, "Feeding these rebel powers that thee array," which implies that the soul is bound to the body, which is seen as greedy or the rebel powers. He goes on to say, "Why dost thou pine within and suffer dearth, painting thy outward walls so costly gay?" And it's here that the speaker begins a metaphor. He sees the soul as a person in a house who is starving, and yet the person goes to great lengths to make sure the house appears lavish on the outside while dying within. In the second quatrain, the speaker goes on to expand this metaphor, saying, "Why so large cost, having so short a lease, dost thou upon thy fading mansion spend?" The large cost and short lease emphasizes how the speaker feels it's irrational for the soul to spend so much time on the temporal body when it itself is eternal. The temporal body is represented by the fading mansion. He goes on to say in the second half of this quatrain that worms, inheritors of this excess, eat up thy charge. Is this thy body's end? And it's here that he's emphasizing that the body came from the earth, and to the earth the body shall return. And this could be a tie to Genesis chapter 3, verse 19, which states, "For your body came from dust, and to dust you shall return." This is also another piece of evidence for the religious aspects of this poem. In the third quatrain, the form of the poem changes. Instead of the soul being seen as something withering and dying within, it is implored to leave the body behind and become eternal as it was meant to be. It begins by saying, "Then soul, live thou upon thy servant's loss," which is interesting because the soul is implored to live not in spite of the loss, but because of the loss, which is somewhat counterintuitive. The speaker goes on to say, "And let that pine to aggravate thy store," which is again imploring the soul to leave the body so that it itself may flourish. The speaker goes on to say, "Buy terms divine in selling hours of dross, within be fed, without be rich no more," which again is an emphasis on his wanting the soul to leave the body, let the body wither so that the soul will no longer suffer. The poem ends with a couplet. Beginning, the couplet states, "So shalt thou that feed on death that feeds on men," which is an ironic juxtaposition because it is saying that death, in spite of the fact that it feeds on men, is now itself being fed on. The poem continues this in the last line saying, "And death once dead, there's no more dying then," which implies that death itself has died. The ironic part of this last line in the sonnet is that the word death, or forms of it, death, dead, dying, is used 3 times, but in reality, the last part, saying there's no more dying then, actually implies a look of eternal life, contrary to the word death. And now that I have explained some of this poem to you, I will recite it again so that you may more deeply understand. Poor soul, the center of my sinful earth, feeding these rebel powers that thee array, why dost thou pine within and suffer dearth, painting thy outward walls so costly gay? Why so large cost, having so short a lease, dost thou upon thy fading mansion spend? Shall worms, inheritors of this excess, eat up thy charge? Is this thy body's end? Then, soul, live thou upon thy servant's loss, and let that pine to aggravate thy store. Buy terms divine in selling hours of dross, within be fed, without be rich no more. So shalt thou feed on death that feeds on men, and death, once dead, there's no more dying then. Thank you.